All right, welcome back to You Have Permission. I'm back with Kristen Tideman, who you all know and love, but also a very special additional guest, Sara Tideman, Kristen's Gen Z younger sister. Giggling is already ensuing over on their shared camera. They're in person together, which I think will end up making for a more fun situation than three people on Zoom. Sara, welcome for your first You Have Permission appearance.
Thank you so much. I love to represent my community of the youth, actually.
We're grateful that you will be a youth ambassador today here for us on the show. You guys do have a very funny podcast that you make together called Help Me Gen Z.
Whoa,
and if people are
so nice.
people are wanting some funny culture content, mostly where Sara gives Kristen a hard time for being 7 or 8 years older? What's the age difference?
Like 7.
6.5.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
A mere.
Okay.
And we're the same age now, actually.
Yeah, we've been the same age now ever since she wasn't a kid.
I was just thinking this morning about asking about age, and is that a remnant of patriarchy that I still follow the rule of not asking women how old they are? Isn't the assumption there that they are supposed to stay young and attractive for the men in their life, so you don't ask them how old they are? Isn't that basically what that rule is about?
I mean, it is implying that aging is bad.
Yeah. So am I a real feminist hero by asking women how old they are from now on? Can I infer that?
Yeah, I think that should be your first question, actually. Not, hi, what's your name?
How old are you?
Only when women are guests on the podcast, I just go, okay, so how old are you now? And I never ask men because I'm such an ally, really.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to set up this conversation with two things. First, I want to lay out the table, and then I want to motivate the specific how we got here. So, in terms of laying out the episode, think of this as the three of us walking into a Golden Corral buffet and grill. And there's a whole counter full of hot and cold dishes. And I can't necessarily predict every item we're going to sample or how long we're going to spend on it. But among those items are the following 5 items.
Oh, it's a buffet.
Yeah.
This is You Have Permission presents Golden Corral. Number 1, Barbie and the air quotes Oscar snubs, which we can talk about to what extent those really are snubs, of Margot Robbie as Barbie and Greta Gerwig for Best Director. No nominations there, and that was kind of a big culture war article, and we are recording this on the eve of the Oscars. This is going to come out kind of right after the Oscars, I believe. So we don't know who's going to win the various Oscars. We're not here to do an Oscars episode, but it's kind of in the air. Number 2, Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce being brought into the culture war around the NFL and their relationship in the last couple months. Number 3, there's a lot of data from around the world that there is an increasing sociopolitical gap from left to right among Gen Z and among males and females. It breaks on gender lines. We can talk about that. And it's a real break from previous generations. So, Sara, we'll be really happy that you will have the full rundown on why your entire generation. Exactly. Yeah, thank you. 2 more kind of smaller items. Maybe we consider these sides, not the main dishes at the Golden Corral.
Salad.
Green beans.
Yeah, exactly. Fried okra would be considering gender issues through a zero-sum framework or not, which I think is an interesting lens. And then finally, just this ongoing focus on You Have Permission of this purported masculinity crisis, any role that might be playing here, sort of what's going on with boys and men, which is something I'm interested in. So that's the buffet. Any clarifications or questions about that from the two of you?
Why do you hate women? No.
I was going to say that too.
Cool. Starting off on a good foot. I'm not feeling ganged up or anything at all. Okay. And then just to motivate this. So I mentioned that generational gap. There was a very good episode of Plain English with Derek Thompson on the Ringer Network, which we will link to in the show notes. Kristen and I both listened. I know, Sara, you at least checked out part of it. But the idea there is just that there is this big split between males and females, and it is not just in the U.S. It's in Australia. It's in South Korea. It's in Europe. Young women, Gen Z women, are turning sharply left and Gen Z males are turning somewhat right. And not as much, and we're kind of oversimplifying by putting all those together, but it's really cross-cultural, and would highly recommend people listening to that episode if they find that interesting. So that was sort of the impetus, and I called Kristen, or I sent her a voicemail memo or something because I can't find it anymore, about we should talk about this episode. We'd wanted to do something on Barbie. We'd wanted to do something on Taylor Swift again. And then we thought, let's bring Sara in. We now have our own little generation gap culture hour here today on the main feed of You Have Permission. And we'll see.
Take that, Tony and Josh.
Take that, Tony and Josh. Girls rule. Boys drool. Okay. So I would like to extend the chivalry that I've already been showing by not asking ages, and let you guys go through the buffet line first. So what do you want to talk about first? What is kind of pinging either of your minds, or, what sounds spicy and fun?
So I think we should start with Barbie. I think we should talk about Barbie. I know Sara was a huge fan. That's part of the reason I was like, she's got to be on here. And I'm a pretty big fan myself. I've seen it 2.5 times since it's come out.
2.5?
Yeah.
She's beating me.
Sibling rivalry.
So
different podcast.
Picked up. So yeah, and Sara, I guess one thing that I know, I'm curious from both of you, because I know you had initial instincts having seen it. And Sara, I know you loved it. Dan, maybe a bit more suspicion. And I'd love to hear where that came from for each of you. So Sara, how did it speak to you?
I mean, to be dramatic as I am, Barbie as a film sort of like reignited my love of being a person.
Yeah.
Like, genuinely seeing someone who is like essentially not a human want to be a human was like, it really shifted something in me. And I feel like, to be dramatic again, like I look around now and I see like little humanity moments happening, and I'm like, oh my gosh, yay. Like I feel like more inspired by like the people around me.
What was I made for?
Yeah, I sing that every morning.
Well, it's interesting because, I think that's true. That is in the film. It is basically a story about a toy waking up to the realities of what human beings deal with. It's like it's an existential film in that sense. But of course, it's also a film about feminism and gender. And I think that part, maybe for obvious reasons, has gotten a lot more ink and attention. And maybe I would consider the centerpiece of the film to be America Ferrera's character giving that speech about how it's impossible to be a woman. That seems to be kind of the thesis of the film. And that's not about as much being a human. It's about the difficulties of being a woman in America or in the West. And yet, you're right that there is this other core of like, she's realizing she's a toy and that she lives in a manufactured world that is, protected from these things that are happening in the quote real world, which is itself kind of a stylized version of the real world as well in the film. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting for me because I feel like all the reaction to Barbie was more about like the gender realities about it. And I think, somewhat of a hot take, the America Ferrera speech, it didn't hit me that hard. So I feel like it wasn't my personal centerpiece of the film. It wasn't something that I was like, oh, like I'm going to go home and look this up again and watch it again.
Have that YouTube clip like always open in a tab or saved as a bookmark.
Yeah, it's my alarm in the morning.
Yeah, I mean, I do think I liked that speech and it made an impact on me, but I took much more of the existentialism away from that, and just like, I mean, a lot of it's very tropey of like, this is how women are, this is how men are, but it's like, one thing I'll bring up now, but I'll bring it up again, is I think there's so much that we see of how you're socialized playing a part into how you feel about gender, and that being such a key. I mean, maybe, if we're going to get to just aspects of like gender, what's the word? Fluidity. I was like, frugality?
Feudalism, actually.
Yeah.
The
Gender feudalism.
Gender.
Not enough people are talking about that, honestly, these days. That's my sense.
Yeah, real lack of conversation there.
Yeah, and how that is like such a distinct thing. So like having these roles kind of played out in a more dramatized fashion was interesting to me. And having seen the movie with guys, both times I saw it in the actually, and even the third time watching it at my friend's house, who is also a guy, like seeing these guys' takes, I'm like, it's kind of funny that I think there's different reactions. And Dan, I do want to hear yours, but some of them are like, it's a silly girly movie, or it's just ridiculous. And it is kind of ridiculous intentionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's ridiculous in the way like Groundhog Day is ridiculous. That's not a knock against it. It's a surrealist comedy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so the ridiculousness is I mean, yeah. Well, do you want me to tell you what I thought about the movie?
Yeah. Tell
Yes.
go.
I do need to watch it again because, as I've told Kristen, I watched it at
your
the
take's gonna be wrong.
very end. No, but it wasn't a great context to see it. I saw it at the end of a very long work week, and Friday evening, Jaffrey and I like got a sitter, went and got dinner. I got a couple drinks, and then I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna laugh so hard," and I realized that I was just like so tired and kind of frayed from the week, and so I want to watch it again when I'm like more rested. My take was that like at a film level, I like movies like Barbie. My favorite, I mean, Groundhog Day is kind of in that world. There's a lesser known film called Defending Your Life, an Albert Brooks film from the 80s or 90s. It's Albert Brooks and Meryl Streep, and basically he dies and wakes up in the afterlife, and in the afterlife you have to like basically sit before this panel that play video versions of the most sort of morally important moments of your life, and you have to sort of defend yourself to like get into heaven.
Whoa.
And so that aspect, and it's like this, it's all like done on sound stages similar to Barbie, where it's like this very kind of safe looking kind of manufactured vibe and this kind of surrealist reality. And, you know, even a movie like Bottoms, which came out also last year, was much smaller, but also had a heightened surreal reality. Maybe the world of Bottoms is kind of like the real world in Barbie, you know, the non-Barbie Land version. That's kind of what Bottoms is like. It's not as surreal as the Barbie Land in Barbie. Of those four movies that I've mentioned, like Barbie is my fourth favorite of them as a film. There are things that it does incredibly well. I think just in general, it was like a Herculean task to figure out how to turn this toy into something that works as cinema. And I think that so much of that was like a huge success. I think Gosling's performance, Margot Robbie's performance, Greta's kind of like overall vision. I'm also a huge Greta Gerwig fan as a director, and this is certainly like my least favorite of her films. I would put Little Women and Lady Bird above this easily, personally. And so some of that's like, it just felt like a little uneven as a film, but it was like an incredibly difficult project. I don't think the Will Ferrell stuff really worked. And then there's so that's my movie stuff.
I was going to say, you're talking about the film side, which
I
I know you love.
I know.
But the cultural side.
Okay. Then I did feel like, as a guy watching it, and again, I was exhausted and a little bit buzzed, but I felt like the film at parts of the film were almost daring me to feel triggered or offended by it. And that is certainly like, I have no idea if that's the intention of the filmmaker, and I don't want to pretend that I know that it is, because it might not be. But it felt like I dare you to react kind of a thing in the moment. Again, I was very tired. I want to watch it again and see if I still feel that way the second time, and I haven't gotten around to it yet. But for instance, in that America Ferrera speech that we're talking about, like, I thought this feels really plausible to me. What felt hard was, I think you could replace woman with a number of other things and come up with a pretty compelling speech of the way that society asks the impossible of people. And I realize like that immediately goes to like, oh, men have it just as bad. You know, that's not my point, but just that like, it's impossible is kind of actually black and white thinking. It's kind of like a cognitive distortion. It's hard. And some of those, you're this, but you're this, do this, but don't do that. Some of those are being required of people at the same time, but some of them are being required at different times. And, you know, people do wear different hats. They wear different roles in their lives. And it felt like slightly cheap, like a little bit of a cheap shot kind of a thing. And yet I know people who I respect who that speech resonated with them so strongly and gave them language for something that they feel really deeply. So I'm trying to kind of hold these things all at the same time. And what I've really come to in the end, as I've thought through the movie and my reaction to it and other movies, is I think that it's okay that there are things that are not for me. I'm not the primary audience for them. And that's fine. So that's kind of where I've landed.
The first thing I do want to comment on is this replacement of woman, and just a couple resources I'm going to draw on is one, the book entitled, actually assigned to us in grad school by Kate Mann, it's talking about male entitlement. And there's a lot of research in there. One thing that's very much known through a lot of different research now is like it's men kind of entitled to not needing to do as much like work at home and home labor, and how women, and again, heterosexual relationships, but how women will do almost always more work. The only time where it becomes almost the same is if a woman has a full-time job and a man has no job at all. Then the shared labor is almost on par. So that comes up. And another article I just read last week, actually, in the Washington Post, was about how women who are promoted are actually more likely to get divorced because there's all these components of historically, men being the breadwinners, women being more dependent.
Right.
And so there's a lot of societal changes that are going on. And I think, I'm excited to hear Sarah's thoughts and how this is influencing Gen Z, where they see a future where, first of all, men are not really expected to be the breadwinners less than ever before. I would say there's a larger constituency of non-heterosexual relationships. There's also statistics on fewer people getting married in general, and then, how relationships are more fluid. And so just a lot of things that were considered normal and we were socialized for them to be normal have changed. And so when this plays into this gender conversation, and I think where maybe it initially interested you, Dan, is men in particular, having been socialized as men by men who lived in a different time, are feeling a little bit lost. And what I'm suspecting is that they see, almost like the MAGA movement, a return to something almost kind of fictional that's going to help restore the sense of place and orient them in the world. But what I would say is I don't think I see it that way. And I'm curious what you think about that, especially as a member of Gen Z certified.
Gen Z ambassador Sara Tideman, thank you for your time.
Yeah. They all voted me in.
When you do the voting for Gen Z ambassador, it's just like a TikTok poll, right? It's not, there's no
it's actually a TikTok shop, and they all buy a little button for me.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
There we go. First of all, do you see, especially your female friends or female identifying or, whoever, most of your friends, I don't know, non-binary, etc.
Okay.
Quick, future-proof your question. Make sure you get up, Kristen. Phrase it right.
The people you see who you're interacting with, and one thing I'll comment on, Dan, is like Sarah and I both went to Christian high school and we're very involved in Christian church, so I think saw the evidence of a more conservative demographic in those spaces.
Yeah.
And
more recently than I did also. I've had a long time since I had to be in those environments, like 23 years or something for me.
Yeah, I'm, 7 school years older than Sarah. And so even in that time, there was a lot that I saw that changed. Like, and I'll just say this, I remember when I was in high school, people were still calling each other gay as like a funny joke that people could say. And we knew one gay person. And I think in your high school experience, that was very different, even in 7 years later.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably interesting, like, my difference in that sort of space than you guys, because I feel like people in my high school, we've been on the internet already. And I feel like going on, like, Tumblr, Twitter, whatever, as, like, someone who was, like, 14, 15, like, already I think a lot of, my friends who were girls, especially, and probably other people, were already shifting more left, more, like, progressive, liberal, what have you. Then I think if I had been like the same age as Kristen, I think that like kind of shift might not have been there in the same way.
Well, and that's what the larger data is seeming to say about Gen Z versus millennials. Because Kristen and I are about 10 years apart, but we are both millennials. We're kind of, definitely in that cohort together.
And one thing I'll say, even from being in college, I remember it was the 2012 election, Obama and Mitt Romney,
Mhm.
Mitt
which
Romney,
honestly,
platinum artist.
you gotta love Mitt. But people just weren't as concerned. It wasn't as, I will be honest, I voted for Mitt at the time. I was very conservative. I was like, I'm going to vote Republican my whole life. Like, that's
Sure.
what I thought.
Yeah.
I've skewed more progressive
Yeah.
in my life. But at the time, my roommate voted for Obama. And we were like not mad at each other. We were just like, okay, this is what we did. And I don't even know if that would be like kosher. I mean, especially when Trump's in the mix. If your roommate was voting Trump and you were voting, Biden now, could you even get along? Like, I feel like that's a big difference.
Yeah.
There's so much around that. A lot of it is that the culture war, which starts as sociopolitics, but ends up dealing with cultural artifacts like Barbie, feels a lot more present than it did when you or I were in college, for instance. And the Oscar snubs, I mean, we can kind of go past this quickly, but the quote snubs of Barbie, that was like, it felt to me in a cynical way like there were a bunch of culture writers who had that article already written and were ready to click publish as soon as Greta didn't get director, or Margot didn't get lead actress, or Barbie itself didn't get Best Film nomination. Now, it did get Best Film, and Gosling got Best Supporting.
And Ferrera got Best Supporting.
And America Ferrera, that's right. And someone asked Greta about her snub, and Greta's like, I did get an Oscar nomination. I got a nomination for Best Picture. Like, I don't need to also get director. Like, it's my movie, and we got nominated for Best Picture. Very quickly, I saw people who are not bigoted, but who understand the Oscar race, kind of explaining that, like, comedies rarely get anything. Comedies are, like, traditionally very snubbed by the Oscars. So the fact that it got some nominations is already meaningful. And comedic directors, especially, like, never get directing nominations. It's almost always dramas and stuff like that. And then the final thing is that it's just it's a lot easier in some ways to get supporting nominations than it is to get lead nominations. You're up against just like a more packed field, right? And so if they had put Margot Robbie in supporting and like Gosling in, it probably wouldn't have made sense. Like she probably had to be in the category of lead, but movies will do this. Studios will do this. They'll kind of do what's called like category fraud and move someone around so they have a better chance. And basically everybody who knows this world never expected Margot to get a nomination and didn't expect Greta to get the nomination. And not just because, well, it must be that there is so much misogyny. It's like there are these other things as well around comedies and around supporting versus lead. Even though it made a lot of money, a lot of films make a lot of money and don't do well at the Oscars because the Oscars isn't really about blockbusters. But there it was, this like perfect cultural war piece, publish, we'll get some clicks, we'll get some ad revenue. And then, my eyes began rolling immediately. But I'm curious, I'm a 40-year-old dude. Like, did it feel like that to you, Sarah? Or did it feel more present and maybe there's some injustice here or, whatever?
To be vulnerable, I don't really understand how directing works on a grand scale. It's kind of confusing.
Directing a film?
I know that they're like, okay, stand here, do this, la la la. But like, as like people, I feel like a director is such like the centerpiece of people's conversation about a film.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, well, there's like a bunch of writers and like cinematographers, like set designers. So it's always a little bit confusing to me. I did feel like I would have guessed that Greta would have gotten a Best Director nomination kind of because of like how the world, especially Barbie Land, was constructed. Like that would have been my guess. And I think also like me and other like young people who don't understand things, like the thought of a movie being like the cultural moment of the year, making an unreal amount of money and being in this like Barbenheimer pairing, not getting like the sweep of high accolades was kind of confusing.
Well, just really quickly, it did get Best Production Design, which would be the world, and Best Costume Design, which would be the clothing and all that kind of thing. So that there are categories for those kinds of things.
Right.
Probably the way to think, again, at the risk of mansplaining, the way to think about a director,
above the line.
Directors are basically like the buck stops with the director on a film. That's why they're kind of credited kind of first and last. And, you know, Greta pitched this whole thing as like a PowerPoint to the studios. Like, it's kind of like her vision, literally, and then it literally becomes her vision. So that's how to think of. That's probably the best way to think of director for the less initiated in the world of film, which I think plenty of listeners probably share that. You know, don't have that either.
I do get it broadly directing, but like, well, I think also it's like,
thank you for being vulnerable.
Yeah,
I appreciate your vulnerability about your lack of film production knowledge.
I know things about film, but that one always just like sticks with me.
Sure.
But also because like she was like a co-writer for the screenplay.
Yeah, with Noah Baumbach. Yeah, her husband.
Her husband.
Yeah. So that makes more sense to me. Like, oh, if you wrote it, then you're kind of like.
And a lot of times writers can be directors, but there are times when there's
They also got a nomination for adapted screenplay. The idea being that it was adapted from Barbie, but I think of it as more of an original screenplay. Anyway, that's in the weeds on movie culture. But yeah, so it got six or seven nominations there.
Yeah.
Yeah, snubs is a lot. People act like the Oscars were like, this movie is stupid and women suck. And I think it was more like some of the aspects of this film are like, again, I don't really know how to rank this, but I feel like it was like a big year for movies. It seems like there is a lot of like very stiff competition. Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing from film and Twitter is that the best actress race this year is already like really tough.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I know, and another movie that I know is in like Best Picture is like Past Lives, which really centers a female lead and things like that. So
yeah, and also just like the calling out of snubs for Barbie and not looking at like tons of other movies that could also be called snubs. I think is kind of like indicative of people who maybe aren't really into film on a grander scale or like don't really like watch as many movies as they talk about this one movie. Oh, and I wanted to bring up the Greta Margot snub conversation. The pinnacle moment of that for me was Hillary Clinton.
Did you see this, Dan?
I don't remember now. Refresh my
Sarah,
memory.
tell us again. Oh my gosh, it's so funny.
It could be a top tweet of the year. I probably should just read it. But
a top
Hillary
tweet of
Clinton,
the year? Is this a feature on Help Me Gen Z, by the way? Do you do?
Oh my gosh.
You should do a top tweets of the year.
Tweet of the week
roundup. Absolutely.
Wow.
Oh,
Sarah knows.
I need to dig in. But Hillary Clinton tweeted, Greta and Margot, while it can sting to win the box office but not take home the gold, your millions of fans love you. You're both so much more than Kenough. Hashtag Hillary Barbie.
Is she pitching a Hillary Barbie publicly?
Okay, that's an Oscar winner right there. I would watch that 85 times easy.
If there was an award, if there was an Oscar for worst PR move, or whatever.
Didn't she like crawl? Hadn't she not been tweeting and she like came out of hiding to like tweet?
I think she tweets like occasionally more about political things,
Sure.
But this was just, I mean, it seems like a white feminism embodiment tweet to be like, hey girls, I know you made billions of dollars, but just like me, you lost. And that's really sad. Like the reference to her own campaign loss is crazy.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Okay, but bringing us back, so, okay, there's a few things, and this came up on the plain English conversation, a few things that I want to mention influence the broader conversation of, like, the polarization of young men and women.
Yeah.
And I think one of those that they mention that is very apparent is social media and the rise of the internet and how that has just changed culture. And how, I'll say, between me and Sarah, distinct changes. I didn't have a smartphone until halfway through college.
Right.
Facebook was like not what it is now by any means. There were fewer sites. There were fewer things to do. So it was just different. And then I think the other thing being, unfortunately, capitalism, I have to mention.
What?
But just because if you think about it, like all these articles, you're not just incentivized to be loud because you get attention, but in many places because that is going to then result in monetization, like of some sort.
Oh, yeah.
So, and you see that, I think, especially on TikTok, the amount of TikToks devoted to how to get a viral TikTok are crazy. And like I see them, it's like, do you see this on yours?
Never ever. This is polarization topic number 57. Our TikToks could not be more different.
No.
This is like self-help, optimization, business. And I'm like, sometimes dances and just goofy stuff.
Yeah. It's dramatic, the differences. Like, sometimes I just want to see other people's TikToks because they're so mine's therapists, marketing information, definitely, self-help, like, thinking deeply. Like, I've heard people call it wholesome, and I will take that, but sometimes I wish it was a little funnier. And I'm like, what does this say about me?
Yeah.
Who am I? What was I made for?
How about Taylor and Travis? Did this one reach? Like, what's your Swift fan level for each of you? I'm curious.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's why Sarah's here, basically.
Yeah. This is also the thing that, like, Barbie and Taylor Swift are two things that, as a young white woman, it's hard to be like, I like these a normal amount. I'm not crazy about it. But
it's
on some level,
super not
like,
weird. Yeah.
Yeah, like, it's not that serious. But, like, I am a big Taylor Swift fan. This is not a lie. Identifying as a Swiftie is hard for me because, sorry, girlies, but you're really crazy and you have, like, whack thoughts a lot of the time.
Did you go to the tour in person or movie theater only, or neither?
Neither, actually.
That's how you know your normal amount.
You're not a Swiftie, yeah. You are.
Yeah.
You're super normal, yeah.
Yeah, but, like, do I know all the songs? Maybe I do, or at least most of them.
Sure, yeah.
I am a normal level Taylor Swift fan, nothing crazy. But I'm, like, a big Taylor Swift fan. I mean, she's in my top
big fan. Well, isn't
top
she
artist
your
every
favorite artist? Would you say? Or
I wouldn't say that.
Okay, so that's good. Normal
I
levels.
mean, my data might say that, and I don't know.
The look on your face as you said, I wouldn't say that, kind of said that.
I worry that, like, empirically she is my favorite artist, but I don't think I mean, well, to be a normal Taylor Swift fan, she is not an excellent singer, which is fine. I think that's a smaller part of an artist. Yeah, she's not a vocalist, and I don't think that even she would say that.
I mean, she's a pretty good singer, I think, and she's a fantastic pop songwriter. Maybe the best we've got.
Yeah, well, I think it's also like the comparison of the Renaissance Beyonce tour versus the Eras tour. Like, Beyonce as, like, a visionary artist, performer, whoever, you can, like, see obviously that she is better at this than Taylor Swift. But I think the relatability and, like, connection with especially, like, young women for Taylor Swift is, like, it really is, like, they're locked in.
Yeah. I'm not a huge fan, but
she hates Taylor Swift.
Well, that's the thing. I feel like some people feel like it's almost like this. It's almost like, oh, I only have guy friends. It's almost the same energy to say you hate Taylor Swift, which is anti-feminist, actually.
Wow.
It is this, like, passe, like, remnant of, like, 2011 sexism culture.
Yes.
To be like, I hate her. Like, people literally don't like her all the time and are normal about, like, that, too.
Just be like, I don't really care. Like, that's the thing. Like, I'm not, like, invested. Like, a new thing's coming out. I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm going to go listen to it. Like, maybe, if Sarah wants me to listen to something, I'll listen to it. And you end up hearing her songs just by walking around any place, anywhere in the United States. But, like, and she's been around since I was, in high school. But but it's crazy when people are like, and it is kind of, people do get nuts about it. I mean, I have friends who went to the Eras tour, and then I had friends who were almost, like, had issues in their friendship because they felt like one of them was, like, a bigger fan, or we're, like, almost competing.
Whoa.
Well, having grown up on punk rock, honestly, I relate to that. Young people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, young people just putting way too much emphasis on their musical identities. Like, that's a tale as old as pop music, in my opinion. So that doesn't surprise me. When the news came in, because of her involvement at NFL games, there is now, like, a critical mass backlash in conservative media about, like, Taylor's presence at Chiefs games, obviously leading all the way up to the Super Bowl. Did that, like, catch you off guard? Was that silly? Was that, like, how did you guys metabolize that story?
Yeah, I was just saying this to Kristen. Like, I don't want to dismiss people's beliefs. Well, yeah, but it is that kind of thing is something that I'm like, I don't believe that the top layer of people talking about that first actually care about. I like truly can't even conceptualize that that's a thing that like bothers you in a real way, and like maybe I'm way off base and in my echo chamber thinking that, but it feels like, well, it's kind of like almost the inverse of like the articles about like the Greta Margot snubs. It's like, oh, this thing people will talk about is I'm just gonna say whatever, and like if it's like mad enough and like incendiary enough, people will be like, yeah, or like, no, this is crazy. It's like engagement bait essentially.
Yeah,
Rage bait.
Yeah.
Rage bait. That's good.
Yeah.
Definitely that.
It's like a term. Yeah.
It's like kind of like buzzword Mad Libs, like like Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce, football. She's at the stadium and she's on camera, and that's bad.
Yeah.
Okay, it is silly because we like American pop culture football's already a part of it.
It is at the absolute center of it, and so is Taylor Swift. In fact, those might be the two most popular things in America: NFL and Taylor Swift.
Totally. And Taylor Swift is a marketing maven. We've said it before. We'll say it again. You know, dating Travis Kelce, who's in the Super Bowl and is, you know,
also pretty savvy marketer. With he and his brother are very sort of pop cultural savvy in front. Yeah.
They have the podcast. They had a special about them this year.
Right.
I mean, like Jason's whole retirement stuff was like front page news, you know, like.
Yeah. Because plenty of like pop stars, actors date people in sports and like no one cares at all.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just like these very visible people.
Like, who was the girl who dated Aaron Rodgers?
Shailene Woodley.
Yeah.
Right.
And like people knew about it, but it was not like, oh, we're going to like go over to her in the stands.
Chuck Klosterman, when he was on the Bill Simmons podcast recently, he argued that the reason that people care, that the conservative media cares about Kelce and Swift, is that they are known quantities and they are known to be more left-leaning as people. If they weren't, if they were, you know, the modern day version of Tim McGraw and Faith Hill or something like that, then it wouldn't make a stink. But because, you know, Taylor, you know, for all the talk about her being non-political, like, she has been active in presidential campaign years in the past, and she leans Democrat. She's done fundraisers for Democratic candidates. And I don't listen to the Kelce's podcast, but my understanding is that he is also more left-leaning, at least for football world, which...
Well, isn't he in like the Moderna commercial or something for getting vaccinated? He's like
Pfizer.
Oh, Pfizer, yeah.
He's pro-vaccine. Wow, that's the worst thing you can be.
Yeah, like Aaron Rodgers called him Mr. Pfizer.
Did he? Because Aaron Rodgers is an anti-vaxxer.
Yeah, he's more in the RFK Jr. world. So I do. That seems like a pretty good argument to me from Klosterman that's probably part of it.
That does make sense,
right? That would kind of motivate that.
Just to like pop in, I think like you mentioned like criticism of Taylor as non-political. It is so weird. Like everyone who's in like my like natural sphere on social media is like, Taylor's not saying anything. She is so lukewarm on any issue. She doesn't speak up about almost anything. She'll be like registered to vote, but beyond that, I think since she like did call out Trump in the 2016 election, she's not like super vocal. Yeah. So it's funny to me that like for other people she is like, yeah, like left lightning rod girl. It's like it's just weird that the like divide on how people see her, their lenses, is so stark.
Yeah, well, and you know all this stuff with the jets, like flying her jets around and being like a eco-terrorist sort of vibe. Not totally, which I also saw Kim Kardashian's the worst offender. Taylor's not the worst offender, but Taylor Swift is like seen, you know, and that's like anti the world, and obviously with all the climate change anxiety and everything. And she doesn't speak to that. She just like the one kid in Florida who was like making that Instagram account like tracking her jet. They like sent him a cease and desist. Yeah. So
it's like publicly available information. It's kind of crazy.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, that one's interesting. I mean, let's just not wade into that water. It will take too long. Okay, so let's talk about this left-right move among Gen Z men and women. I'll just briefly summarize what I can remember from the article. It's like, if you look at these graphs in all these different cultures, you see like maybe like a 10-point swing toward the right for Gen Z, and basically it's like stuff that they've measured for different generations at the same point in time, right? So there is usually some distance, and women are more progressive than men who are more conservative, and you do see that pretty much all along. But more recently with Gen Z, what you see is this like much more significant gap. Like what would normally be something like a 10-point gap is now like a 40-point gap. And you see these lines diverging on these graphs like quite wildly. And it's happening across cultures, as I said. And certainly the internet's got to be a part of that, because that's one of the biggest changes that we've had between the generations, which you guys have already been mentioning. My first question for you, Sarah, is just like, in your own natural circles, as you call them, do you see this? Like, are your male friends, are they your friends in part because you see eye to eye politically, and so you're not seeing this? Do you see it with like your cousins or people that you know but don't hang out with as much? Like, I'm just kind of curious, like, when you listened to that or have seen those headlines, like, how does it hit you?
Yeah, this is tricky for me to answer because of my lack of male friends as a lifetime trend for me, not by choice. I'm not meeting these guys. From what I see, like, like high school people, like people that I know who happen to be men in the world, it is like definitely like way higher chance that they are like conservative. And of course, I mean, like coming from our high school, that is like a place where it's like more people are conservative, like
the Christian high school.
Yeah. As a rule, like that was like the environment that many people grew up in.
For sure.
Already there. A lot of my like girl friends from high school, like even in high school, were already like going more liberal, and I did not see that as much with any of the guys that I knew.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but I even feel like I'm kind of seeing this with some of my guy friends.
What are you seeing?
Like, kind of starting to trending more conservative than then maybe they even did in college. Or I think the sentiment I'm hearing from guys is like, I mean, there's too much wokeness. Like, it's kind of like almost to the point where it's kind of ridiculous in their eyes. But I almost do wonder if they kind of like feminize it in a way, like, oh, girls are gonna like nuance all these genders and do all these things, but like we're out here working or something like that. Like, I feel like that's a little bit of a, obviously exaggeration, but I don't know. Like, what is your vibe on this, Dan? Like, what do you think?
It's hard for me because my circles, the people who have kind of self-selected in my life, especially in the last decade, I started a podcast in 2016 called Depolarize. So like I've kind of planted my flag as like, I'm not doing the culture war tribalism thing. And so I think I have a lot of male and female friends who agree on that. Like I consider most of my friends to be in what I call the exhausted majority when it comes to the culture war, which is, I don't remember who coined that phrase, but I like that term. I guess for me, I'm just looking at the data and especially when it comes to the next generation down. I did think that Derek's guest on that episode had a really interesting kind of argument, which is that for men anyway. So in talking about men moving conservative, but Derek also mentions like, keep in mind the men are moving a bit, but the women are moving a lot. So if we actually want to understand the gulf, more of that is from the change among young women. But for the men, the brief model she puts forward is like, okay, if men are failing to reach whatever they consider to be their desired status. Now, desired status changes by culture, but this is kind of common across some of the cultures, that when the young men don't feel like they're reaching desired status, and if social media or other forces are reminding them of this, and I think we can all relate to how social media sort of rubs our noses in the ways that we're failing, or, our lives don't look as good as other people's lives. That's kind of baked into the cake. Then also on social media, not coming from big mainstream or like established media outlets, but from what she was calling cultural entrepreneurs, which would include influencers and people selling classes and all that stuff. when those cultural entrepreneurs are seeing that landscape and they are selling boys and men the idea, either number one, here's how you reach that status, right? And then they might come up with any number of prescriptions, which may include, patriarchal, misogynistic, sort of reactionary stuff, because that does well with the algorithms. Or they say, this is all bullshit and let's blame women, which is the darkest version of it. Then the guys will inherit, the people for whom that's true, they will inherit this like zero-sum vision of men versus women. And in this moment, the women have the upper hand. And therefore, we have to return to something more like the past to give men back either the upper hand or even charitably to make it fair or whatever. That would be the charitable read. I kind of like that. I like that model to sort of just kind of walk me through it mentally. What do you guys think about that? Does that ring true based on what you're seeing?
It's easy to blame men. It is. Why not? Let's do it.
It's their fault. Is why it's easy.
No, but I would say, and maybe that's even a lesson at the end of Barbie, is like more having a place for everyone. I think the way women are socialized, which plays into this liberal question, is they're socialized to have more friends. Even though in that podcast it mentioned people hanging out a little bit less in person, but to be, I think, a little bit more emotionally available for each other, to be a little softer, to be a little bit less competitive. I think those are traits. And then seeing this, I would say, associating the trend towards liberalism as kind of being, part of that, like saying, well, what does it mean to be liberal? I think for a lot of women, it means more opportunities for everyone, more equality for everyone. Like, I don't think everyone's like sitting down and being like, I'm just going to decide to be liberal. Obviously, that's not how people make decisions. But and I think for a lot of young women, thinking about abortion is probably playing a big part in that. And of course, it's a big part of discussion. And then also feeling, of course, that we're coming out of a time, out of the 20th century, that was much more along patriarchal, standards of women being more dependent and being not able to pursue their own careers. So it's just such a different landscape. But as I said kind of earlier, I think the way people are socialized matters so much more than the actual question at hand. Like, I think some of this still, the underlying narrative is kind of this still a little bit gender essentialism, where I would say, like, I'm curious in all of this, is what direction is all of humanity taking that's like good for humanity and for people who want to be good and who love what's good, and if men are seeing women and they're socialized to believe women are in some ways a threat or they have to get even, what I would say, my gut instinct is that the threat there, or the problem is that they have to see it as a threat, like whatever it is. And I personally, I would have to see research. I'm not an expert, but I'm very unconvinced that it's just a natural tendency that men are going to have to compete against women. I think that is part of the socialization. And I know they talked a little bit about cultural differences and what we've seen historically. And I think, it's a bigger question, but I would say, what could our society be if we were just wanting people to be good people? And part of the whole social media problem of rage bait, of pitting people against each other because it's more interesting, is actually, a detriment to what we could have. I don't know if like your thought process that is at all similar.
Look, I'm not knowledgeable about things in a deep way, but I feel like this feels like a capitalism thing where it's like we have to pit somebody against somebody to like fight and like to blame problems on each other rather than like systems and like things above us that like could be fixed if we work together. And I think, I was thinking like, why is there this gap in like some ways? And like, not that I am a great theorist, but I think you're kind of getting at this, like for men to be right-leaning conservative, like I feel like there's more of an air of benefit for them than there would be for a woman to like go more towards the right. I feel like there's not really like the package sold to women, right wing leaning for women is like, it's less glamorous. It's like you could be like well, like the trad wife trend is like kind of growing, getting some steam, and that's like some people are like, yeah, I want to like cook and have kids, but I think that's like it's less of like a ooh, that looks great for like a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think like being like a financially stable, strong man with a family, like that does look great to a lot of guys.
Yeah. Well, and the whole trad wife thing, like I saw a commentary on TikTok that's like what's being ignored is that these women are still entrepreneurs because they have a lot of content creation requires a lot behind the scenes, is a lot of planning, and they've actually figured out how to monetize this. But for the women who are not monetizing it, it's a different life.
Yeah.
Right.
So
that's interesting. Yeah, the traditionalist influencers are actually making non-traditionalist money from their traditionalist influencing activities on TikTok.
And have like a non-traditionalist like sphere like of support or just like people that they could even talk to versus if you're just like in your house.
Yeah, with your kids.
Well, the beneficial, I mean, so the charitable reading of what they would want in the world is probably something more like that, where there are still support networks. Nobody, like no trad influencer is like, let's go back to where the mom is on an island with no help.
Yeah.
You know, like nobody wants that. One of the things that came up, I think in the Derek Thompson episode of the Plain English episode, and I've certainly seen it or heard it elsewhere, is that when people feel threatened, that's when they tend to go to a zero-sum mentality. And I think you can see this with immigration policy and MAGA, for instance. So it's like the more people feel threatened by immigrants and that kind of thing, the more they think, well, it's got to be America first. It's us or them, and we're going to pick us. Whereas if you are a cosmopolitan, liberal, progressive, whatever, then you're like, there's room at the table for everybody. Like when I think about immigration, I think in terms of like, we got the birth rate's declining. I think of it in this large systems way of like, yeah, we need, like, people need to do these jobs and people want to come here and do them. Let's get them signed up. Let's figure out a way to do that. That's my initial impetus. Now, I don't live in a border town. I don't, you know, I know that there are legitimate concerns in border regions of the country, you know, economic and otherwise. So that's not my world. But I don't think of it zero sum. But I also, like, I'm a well-to-do 40-year-old. I'm not feeling threatened.
Brag.
I don't, well, I'm almost a doctor. I own my home.
Brag.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We're just messing with you. We're messing with you. We're just girls.
Oh my gosh. Women are so unserious. You guys are the problem. Ending this episode. No, but like, you know, how many men, like, I'm sure there are some, but how many men who make $150,000 a year or more are the ones feeling this aggrieved and whatever? Like, I don't have the data on that. I would guess it's a pretty small number. And that this is really more popular. The darkest versions of this for men are much more popular in groups of people who are not doing that well, either economically or social status, whatever that status is. Obviously, money is going to be a part of that status, but it's not all of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're correct in pointing out MAGA. Like the MAGA influence feeds off people who are, it's like this kind of broader nostalgia that is promising and holds a lot of promise for those who feel like they don't have what they want.
Yeah.
You know, and I see that in a similar way in terms of conservatism in general, kind of in the way that it's represented as like, you can have your gun and protect your family. The government's not going to take your taxes, you know, but all of that, it totally makes sense under a threatening environment because it's like hunker down, it's you versus the world, and you're going to be ready if you do it this way. Whereas the liberal people are totally like, they're not prepared, like they're dumb, like they're soft. And like that's a lot of the language that's used, soft, you know? And I think it comes back to this socializing component of guys being socialized to be hard, you know, and just, I would say just recognizing that just doesn't get people very far. And, you know, I'm in favor of seeing a lot more pro-social behaviors for our overall thriving eudaimonia sort of stuff. But it's not it's probably not what sells, you know? And it's not like, and having these kind of gender differences, I would say, like, what's crazier though is that it continues to, I assume, feed off each other. Like, young women seeing men acting this way are getting pushed even further from that because it's very unappealing, you know, if you're in kind of a heterosexual context.
Well, and I think that's the issue ultimately. And a lot of people, I'll get emails every time we do an episode around this from a couple people saying, I just don't understand why this is an issue at all. Like, who cares? I don't, like, gender is either on its way out or it's less important, or, you know, there are different ways that people kind of fill that in. But I think that the kind of policymakers and the people who are looking at the big picture have convinced me of what they see as the problem, which is you don't want a gender war. Like, that's not good for the whole. That's not good for society. You want, like, not everybody is heterosexual, obviously. And so people with queer sexual identities will find the people that they are attracted to. But the majority of people...
They're living the dream.
Yeah, they're just living the dream. But, like, the majority of, like, America, Australia, Canada, UK, all these Western countries, the majority are heterosexual people who are looking for a partner of the opposite gender or opposite sex. I'm not sure what's the right way to say that these days. But if it becomes this thing where there's a really high bar to clear, like, if you are starting because of past experiences, like, everybody is going to be held at a distance, or they're going to have strikes against them, or you're just going to find yourself, you know, young people who are not fully mature and fully formed are going to struggle with, like, basically perceiving potential partners as potential enemies. And that will lead to less marriage, less families, less sex, less children, you know, all these things that generally speaking are correlated with happiness and meaning. And, you know, people can quibble with that, and that's not true for every person. But in the large scale, I don't think that any of that's controversial at all.
The one thing I will call out there. So I think to make it even more obvious, an underlying component here to the entire discussion is that there is something about, well, are you attractive? Are you able to get a mate? Like, that plays a part in this conversation. And so I think, especially for men, young men, single, feeling threatened, who are looking for a woman, there's this particular flavor to this where they feel like they have to be a certain way to attract women. And I just want to bring that up. But another thing is, there are studies that say some of the happiest people alive are women who are unmarried with no children, like in their like late 30s and 40s. And so, but men statistically, and this was in even that one article they were mentioning it, the one in the Wall Street Journal about divorce and women who are successful getting divorced more often, men are statistically able to live longer when they are married and report much higher happiness when they are married.
When they're married, yeah.
So there's, and that, you know, again, I don't know all the components of that, but I think that's an interesting part of this equation as well. I don't know if...
It's hard to, like, think about that kind of thing as, like, even, like, you know, if we're doing, like, the broad strokes of the statistics, for, like, a man and woman to be married, there would be, like, kind of like a happiness gap there. In some way.
It's from the screen. Yeah, it does like a thumbs up.
And I was also thinking, like, not obviously, I think it is, like, again, it's not good for anyone for there to be, like, a true, like, war, like, ideological war between, like, the genders or whatever. But I also am, like, how are we expecting people who do have, like, really different beliefs, like, that do, like, in meaningful ways contradict each other, like, are we expecting them to, like, just compromise on, like, very fundamental levels? Like, how do we get even to a place where people can feel okay about what their ideologies diverge on? And I worry in some ways that, like, it will be that, like, there could be an onus put on women to be like, you, as, like, the more extreme people, push what you have going on down, what you're thinking. Like, this is maybe, like, a little bit, like, you know, ooky spooky extreme, like, scenario, but it is something that it's like, okay, then what is even next for everybody?
Yeah.
I that's an interesting concern, Sarah. I think in my own circles that just doesn't seem possible, but I don't live in red state America, and I couldn't speak to some of those communities where maybe yeah, there would be an expectation for the woman to shut up and, subsume herself under the man. Obviously, I grew up in a religious environment that sort of promoted that. Mine sort of promoted it. I never really bought it. So, but I know that obviously many, many people do grow up in cultures that are much more that way. So that seems like a valid concern. I would say in my circles, and maybe all the way back to Barbie, the sense is like certainly the more prestigious and accepted view is like, men, it's your turn to shut up and take your medicine because we did it for, 200,000 years. And you've only had maybe 50 years that you've had to do this. And I recognize the power of that argument, but I don't think that it feels like a good argument to a 20-year-old male. Because they're like, okay, I know, but I didn't do that. Like, and I'm not necessarily, and if I'm 20 today and I'm a boy and I'm like, didn't get into the college I wanted, maybe struggling with what to do with my life. And I'm like, I understand the historical argument here, but it's not helping me. And I am in a tough spot. And now I'm expected to act as if women have it harder. And I know that historically they have, but now it's not so clear to me that they do anymore. But I can't say that. It's just like I can just imagine being a frustrated younger guy, whereas I'm old enough to remember when it was harder for girls my age to do any number of things. And now we're other than the executive level, amongst millennials, that's evened out pretty much for men and women. But of course we were alive in a time of greater inequality. So it feels, anyway.
Yeah, but I guess maybe I want to say, Dan, is like, so what if you had a 20-year-old, whether patient or just, someone, this maybe child, a friend of yours' child, who started having kids young, or just someone you met, like a young 20-year-old guy, and he's coming to you saying this, and I guess his thing is, if you're saying he didn't get into college, he's feeling like he is behind, he's not reaching that status he wants to reach. And like, I have a gut instinct of what the advice needs to be for him, but what would you say to him?
Can you please? I promise I won't just steal yours. I want to hear what you'd say.
I mean, I want to say, like, you need to look at yourself. And I mean, I think this is where I'm going to go crazy right now. I want to hear Sarah's input on this. This is why I think Jordan Peterson was so appealing to young men, because he's like, just make your bed. He's like, do these things that are like the basics. You're not even doing them. And they were kind of like empowered, actually. And there's a lot to that I would say agree with. I don't remember all his like 12
If Jordan Peterson had
rules,
stuck to very basic kind of standard conservative like personal responsibility advice, I would have a lot less problem with him. And I do think that was low-hanging fruit for a culture that for the most part has preferred to get young men's video game dollars over preferring to challenge them to grow up. And I think I don't really know this world, but I understand that there are, interesting inputs to that around like the different type of parenting that was popular in different eras, right? And so maybe Gen Z males were raised in a, real permissive parenting kind of era where they're kind of babied. Or, again, don't quote me on that. That's not my area of expertise. To answer your question, first of all, therapy is expensive and it's a privilege. It's something that costs a lot of money and time, and you have to either have good insurance from your job or someone else's job that provides good insurance, or you have to have cash to spend. If the person coming to me was able to, get in, or if I was interning at a clinic that was very inexpensive, like when I was in school, these kinds of things, then what I would work on is an individualized plan for that young man to, work on self-efficacy and self-esteem. For me, there would probably be a cognitive behavioral therapy aspect to that. Find the thought patterns that are, making them feel the most like a failure. also looking at their behaviors and what kind of content they're consuming. And, I would take this tailored approach, which is the kind of thing that privileged people can afford. And that's kind of my point, is that those are the people who could get to a good therapist are not the ones I'm concerned about. It's the people who can't. And all they've got is whatever this kind of larger, lowest common denominator culture will give them. And in that world, and again, I'm a bit older, but it does feel to me pretty palpable that, like, you can make fun of men and even get points for it, but you absolutely cannot make fun of women. Like, that is still the sort of social taboo. I try not to make fun of either. I'm not going around wishing I could make fun of more people. Like, for me, that can go off my back, and I can ultimately come to the opinion with Barbie of, like, that just wasn't primarily for me. And that's fine, because there's plenty of things that are for me. But also, I'm just stable. I have a stable life and a happy life. If I wasn't there, I could see myself being really angered by that, what does seem obvious to me. And then if I'm also young, if I'm also immature, if I'm also really feeling insecure about my status, if I'm terrified that I will never meet a partner and I will never find a good job, then it makes sense to me how I could get trapped up in something much darker. And that's, of course, the worst case scenario for some of these young men and getting into the Andrew Tate world and all that, all that poison.
Yeah, this impulse to take personal responsibility already takes a certain level of maturity. It really does. And so the influences we see, and it's so funny. Again, I have this TikTok that's kind of self-helpy, and I'm like, there's so many resources, but if you're not already inclined, it's because I'm already inclined.
The algorithm figured out that you like that stuff.
Yeah, I want to get better. But yeah, so for guys who are not, already who are just at the frustrated point, you want to say, like, they need almost, like, I want to say role models, or I don't know, like, that's where my gut goes. But I'm also like, I mean, it is scary, like, you think about some of the people, like, I mean, if you go really dark, like incel energy, people who truly blame all their problems on women,
right?
That's like a dark place to be. But I think it takes, I mean, I always go back to this, but I think it does also take people actually interacting with you in life to challenge your beliefs and for you to see that they're complex and nuanced and not someone you can one-dimensionalize because you saw someone on the internet.
Yeah.
And people often do present themselves on the internet in a niche, in a, like, with their specialty, because it if you're able to do something repeatedly, again, you can monetize it more easily. Yeah. Showing your nuance doesn't have usually a lot of benefit, personal gain. I almost think something like the 12 steps, but not in the full Jordan Peterson package.
12 rules for life.
Or sorry, that's what I meant. 12 rules for life.
The first thing for these little shits to do is recognize that they are out of control and go to their higher power.
Exactly. Help them see the things they cannot change.
Make some damn amends, you guys. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, we're making points here, actually. The 12-step program might be the way.
12-step recovery from toxic masculinity.
A lot of wisdom in there. Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I guess, like, the thing that's hard in general, and one thing I'm even going to return to, you said something about women being an island, like something that's peculiar in ours.
Sorry, this is a word I can't say.
It's a word. That's I from what I've seen online, a little bit particular about our society as Americans is that we are less communal than other spaces, like especially in Europe, where there's common, that third place is still more alive. Like, you'll walk more in a lot of cities and walk home from school, whereas we're a big driving culture.
And stuff like that.
Yeah, pubs. Right. And some of that, like, I know that in terms of how it was changing, there was some similarity across cultures, but there's a lot of ways in which the U.S. culture is particularly anomalous. Is an anomaly?
Is it anomalous? Yeah.
Anomalous.
Yeah.
Weird. We're weird. And not
Weird.
just white Anglo-Saxon.
No, just genuinely weird. Yeah.
Just genuinely
Just
weird.
Lowercase
and so,
weird. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I want to solve all the problems of the world,
And we will. On our podcast, Help Me Gen Z.
Okay. You know what? We're out of time, and that's the perfect way to end it. Thank you, Sarah, for wrapping us up with a callback joke. You guys, but yeah, Kristen and I, we have a marketing meeting in 2 minutes. And I think we talked about everything I wanted to talk about. So grateful. Obviously, yeah, we haven't solved these major problems, but I think it is helpful. It's been helpful for me to hear your guys' perspective on this and to just kind of, it's such a big topic, and it's the reason I want to do many episodes on it, right? Because it's just, it's so big. Like, what does it mean to be a man or a woman? And especially in this time of really contested views on a lot of those questions. And just real big problems in society connected to this stuff. So I'm grateful. And yes, one last plug. We'll put a link to Help Me Gen Z in the show notes. I would consider like a culture comedy podcast. Is that probably the way to say it?
Oh yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Girl talk.
Yeah,
Okay,
also
girl
not
talk.
regularly released by any means.
Yeah, we're not on the schedule.
Go back to the archives. You know?
The archives are there, and they're still funny.
Yeah,
yes, they
great.
are. They're very funny. All right, Kristen and Sara Tideman, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Dan.